Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through the gates of a medieval palace where velvet hides vermin, feasts hide poison, and every gilded surface conceals a century's worth of secrets that would make your modern problems look like mild inconveniences. If you've ever wondered what it was really like to live among royalty, in an age when a cold draft could kill you and a wrong word could cost you your head, you're about to find out. Before you get too comfortable, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to historically accurate chaos. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and whether you'd survive medieval court life or flee to the nearest monastery. Now dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for some background noise, and settle in. The drawbridge is closing, the torches are lit, and you're about to discover why sleeping in a palace was less luxury and more survival challenge. Congratulations! You've just arrived at a medieval palace in the year 1347, somewhere in the heart of France. The stone walls tower above you like giants, their surfaces darkened by centuries of smoke and weather. Guards eye you suspiciously from the battlements, their crossbows loaded, their patience in. You're here by invitation, which means you're either very important or very expendable. In a medieval palace, those categories often overlap. The outer bailey smells like a farmyard crossed with a battlefield. Horses stamp and snort in their stables. Chickens scatter across the courtyard pursued by kitchen boys who've been chasing the same rooster since breakfast. A blacksmith's hammer rings against an anvil with the regularity of a heartbeat. Smoke rises from a dozen chimneys, mingling with the fog that never quite leaves this valley. You pass through the inner gate, and the atmosphere shifts. Here, the cobblestones are swept, the guards stand straighter, the servants wear cleaner tunics. This is where the nobility lives, and every surface has been scrubbed to remind you of the distinction between their world and yours. But scrubbing can only do so much. The medieval palace is like a beautiful woman with rotten teeth, impressive from a distance, alarming up close. Your quarters are in the guest tower, a charitable term for what amounts to a stone box with a window. The bed is a wooden frame strung with ropes, topped with a straw mattress that rustles ominously when you sit. A wool blanket, scratchy as gilt, lies folded at the foot. There's a chamber pot in the corner, a wooden chest for your belongings, and a single candle that gutters in the draft like it's already given up on you. The window has shutters, but no glass. Glass is for cathedrals and the very rich, and you are neither. When you close the shutters, the room goes dark as a tomb. When you open them, the cold pours in like liquid. You'll spend the night negotiating between freezing and suffocating, a choice that feels less like hospitality and more like a medieval personality test. A servant arrives with a pitcher of water and a knowing look. She's maybe 16, with the kind of world weariness that suggests she's seen a dozen guests exactly like you come and go. Some left richer, some left poorer, some didn't leave at all. She sets the pitcher down, bobs a curtsy so brief it's almost sarcastic, and vanishes before you can ask about dinner. Dinner. The word hangs in the air like a promise and a threat. In a medieval palace, meals are theater, politics, and potential poisoning all rolled into one. You've heard the stories, lords choking on swan, ladies fainting from tainted wine, entire banquets ending in mysterious stomach ailments that the court physician blames on an imbalance of humors. You're not sure what humors are, but you're reasonably certain yours are about to be tested. You descend the narrow spiral staircase, worn smooth by centuries of feet. The steps curve to the right, a defensive feature that gives defenders the advantage when fighting upward. You're not fighting anyone today, but the symbolism isn't lost on you. In this palace, everything is designed to remind you who has power and who doesn't. You're directed to a lower table among the lesser guests, a merchant who deals in spices and secrets, a minor knight whose family fell on hard times, a visiting scholar who keeps a notebook and writes in it when he thinks no one is looking. They nod at you. You nod back. Everyone understands the rules. Be polite, be watchful, and above all, don't eat anything until someone else tries it first. The food arrives in waves. First, bread. Dense, dark, and surprisingly good. You tear off a chunk and realize you've been handed a trencher, a thick slice of stale bread that doubles as a plate. By the end of the meal, it will be soaked with grease and juices, and the servants will collect it to feed to the dogs or the poor, depending on how generous the Lord feels. Next comes soup, a thick pottage made from barley, onions, and something that might be rabbit. It's served in wooden bowls that look like they've seen many meals and very few washes. You dip your spoon, a luxury, as many diners use their bread, and taste something that hovers between hearty and suspicious. The merchant beside you eats with gusto, which you take as a good sign. If he's not poisoned by morning, you'll consider it a win. Roasted fowl arrives, golden and glistening. Chicken, capon, maybe duck. You're not entirely sure, and asking might reveal you as hopelessly common. The meat is rich, the skin crackling, and you wonder how many kitchen boys spent the afternoon turning that spit over the fire. You carve off a portion with your knife. Everyone brings their own knife, forks haven't caught on yet, and pop it into your mouth. It's good, disturbingly good. You realize you haven't eaten properly in days, and suddenly the medieval palace doesn't seem quite so terrible. Then comes the fish course, preserved in salt or soaked in vinegar, depending on how far it traveled. The smell hits you first, briny and insistent. The taste follows, strong enough to make you reach for your cup. The wine is thick, sweetened with honey, and probably watered down to keep guests sober enough to walk, but drunk enough to be manageable. You sip carefully. Moderation is survival in a place where every conversation might be a trap. The high table receives better fare. You watch as servants carry in a roasted boar, its mouth stuffed with an apple, its skin scored in decorative patterns. Venison follows, then elaborate pies whose crusts have been molded into castles and swans. The Lord carves the meat himself, a ritual that demonstrates both his generosity and his control. He decides who gets the best cuts, who receives the scraps, and who is pointedly ignored. Between courses, entertainers appear, a juggler with questionable skills and excellent timing, a minstrel who sings ballads about heroic deeds, carefully adjusted to flatter the Lord and insult his enemies. A fool in motley who delivers jokes so cutting you're surprised he still has his tongue. Laughter ripples through the hall, but it's carefully calibrated. Too loud, and you seem uncouth. Too quiet, and you seem sullen. You aim for the middle and hope you're not being cataloged for future reference. As the meal winds down, you notice the patterns. The Lord's taster, a pale young man who samples every dish before it reaches the high table. The physician lurking near the wall, watching for signs of distress. The guards at every door, their hands never far from their swords. This isn't dinner. It's a performance of security, a reminder that even pleasure requires vigilance. You return to your room as the hall empties, stomach full, head swimming slightly from the wine. The stairs seem steeper now, the shadows deeper. Somewhere in the palace, someone is plotting. Someone is praying. Someone is sharpening a knife or writing a letter or counting coins in candlelight. The medieval palace never truly sleeps. It only pretends, and the pretense is thinner than the walls. Your candle flickers. Outside, the wind picks up, and you hear the distant howl of dogs, or wolves, or prisoners in the dungeon below. It's hard to tell, and no one you ask will give you a straight answer. You pull the scratchy blanket up to your chin and try not to think about the straw rustling beneath you, about what might be living in that straw, about how many people have slept in this bed and how many of them left alive. Welcome to medieval palace life, where every comfort comes with a cost, and the only thing more dangerous than the food is the company. You close your eyes and pray for morning, knowing that dawn is still hours away, and that hours in a medieval palace can feel like years. You wake before dawn, roused by the clattering of pots and the shouting of voices. The kitchen is already alive, and you realize with a sinking feeling that if you want to understand how you stayed alive through dinner last night, You'll need to see where that food came from. You pull on your clothes, still damp from yesterday's rain, and follow the sounds downward, through passages that grow warmer and smokier with each step. The palace kitchen is hell's waiting room. Heat blasts from 3 enormous hearths, each large enough to roast an ox whole. Smoke hangs in the air like a permanent guest, stinging your eyes and coating your lungs. Servants rush back and forth, their faces red from heat and exertion, their clothes stained with grease and ash. This is where the magic happens. And magic, you discover, smells like burning fat and desperation. The head cook, a woman built like a barrel and twice as intimidating, rules this domain with an iron ladle. She shouts orders in a patois you barely understand, swatting lazy servants and testing dishes with the authority of a field marshal. Her name is Mathilde, and she's been cooking for the palace since before you were born. She knows every secret, every shortcut, and every way to kill a man with a poorly prepared fish. You watch as kitchen boys turn spits over the fires, their arms trembling from hours of continuous rotation. One boy, no more than 10, has angry red burns on his forearms from where grease spattered. He doesn't cry. Crying would get him dismissed, and dismissal means his family starves. So he turns the spit and sweats and tries not to think about how much his arms hurt. The ingredients arrive in a parade of the absurd, a cart of live eels writhing in their barrel like nightmares trying to escape, sacks of grain already showing signs of weevil damage that the cook inspects and shrugs at. Weevils add protein, apparently. A whole deer carcass, hung from hooks in the ceiling, its dead eyes staring at nothing while flies begin their inevitable work. Preservation is a constant battle. There are no refrigerators here, no ice boxes, no modern conveniences. Salt is hoarded like gold, used to preserve meat and fish until they're hard enough to double as weapons. Honey serves as both sweetener and preservative, its antimicrobial properties useful even if no one understands the science. Vinegar, bread, and prayer do the rest. You watch a cook gut a fish, the process mechanical and swift. Scales fly like silver rain. Guts hit a bucket with a wet slap. The resulting fillet is rinsed in questionable water and set aside for the evening's meal. Nothing is wasted. The bones go to stock, the guts go to the cats. The scales, you're not entirely sure, but you suspect they end up in something you'd rather not know about. Bread making is a dawn ritual. The palace goes through hundreds of loaves a day, from the fine white bread for the high table to the coarse brown trenchers for everyone else. You watch bakers knead enormous mounds of dough, their arms like pistons, their faces set in concentration. The ovens are brick domes heated by fires underneath, and loading them requires the kind of coordination usually reserved for military maneuvers. One baker shows you how they test the oven's temperature by feel. No thermometers here, just experience, instinct, and the occasional burned hand when instinct fails. The loaves go in on long wooden paddles, golden rounds that will emerge crackling and perfect, or, if the oven is too hot, transformed into charcoal bread that still gets served to someone, somewhere, who probably won't complain, because complaining is how you lose your job. The spice cabinet is locked, not with a simple latch, but with an actual padlock whose key hangs from Mathilde's belt alongside her tasting spoons and her authority. Inside are treasures: black pepper from the Far East, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from highlands you've never heard of. These spices cost more than most servants earn in a year, and they're used with the precision of a pharmacist compounding medicine. You learn about the medieval obsession with mixing flavors. Sweet and savory dance together in ways that would baffle modern palates. Meat is paired with fruit, venison with cherries, pork with apples, fish with oranges. Sugar, when available, goes on everything. The goal isn't balance, it's excess. A demonstration of wealth that says we can afford to make food taste like something other than food.
Then there's the matter of poison. Everyone worries about poison. The Lord has a taster. His lady has a taster. Even the tasters, ironically, sometimes have tasters. Mathilde explains this with the weariness of someone who spent decades preparing food that might be blamed for any number of deaths, whether or not she had anything to do with it. Certain ingredients are suspect. Mushrooms, obviously. Too many varieties. Too many ways to die. Shellfish, which can go bad faster than you can say food poisoning. Anything overly exotic because unfamiliarity breeds suspicion. Even common ingredients get the side eye if they arrive from the wrong source or at the wrong time. The tasters eat before the Lord in a ceremony that's part dinner theater, part Russian roulette. They sample everything, from the bread to the wine to the elaborate pies. Then everyone waits. If the taster is still standing after 15 minutes, the food is declared safe. If he's not, well, better him than the Lord. It's grim arithmetic, but medieval logistics runs on grim arithmetic. You ask Mathilde about famous poisoning cases, and she leans in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There was the bishop who died after eating lamprey eel. The duchess who collapsed at a feast, frothing at the mouth, accusing her husband's mistress with her last breath. The visiting ambassador who developed mysterious stomach pains that the court physician diagnosed as malicious humors before he died 3 days later in agony. Some were poison. Some were probably just medieval food poisoning, which, in an era before refrigeration, was approximately as common as breathing. But poison makes a better story, and stories matter in a palace where reputation is currency. A suspected poisoner is instantly infamous, whether guilty or not. The accusation alone can ruin a life, which makes it a useful tool for those inclined toward political maneuvering. The kitchen has its own hierarchy, as rigid as any noble court. At the top sits Mathilde. Below her, the sauciers and pastry makers, specialists whose skills command respect. Then the roasters, the fish cooks, the soup makers. At the bottom, the scullery maids and kitchen boys who scrub pots, haul water, and do the back-breaking labor that keeps the machine running. You watch a scullery maid scrub a pot that looks like it's been through several wars. Her hands are red and chapped from constant immersion in hot water mixed with sand and lye. She's maybe 14, working 12-hour days for food and a place to sleep in a corner of the kitchen that's too hot in summer and too cold in winter. She doesn't complain. Complaining is how you get replaced. Meals are an assembly line of controlled chaos. For a major feast, preparations begin days in advance. Animals are slaughtered, meat is hung to age, pies are constructed like architectural projects. On the day itself, dozens of people move in choreographed fury, each responsible for their small piece of an enormous puzzle. You see a peacock being prepared for the high table, a showpiece meant to impress rather than nourish. The bird is skinned carefully, keeping the feathers intact. The meat is roasted, then the skin is sewn back on, positioned so the peacock appears to rise from the platter in full display. It's absurd. It's excessive. It's exactly the kind of thing medieval nobility loves. Sauces bubble in pots the size of small children. Medieval sauces are thick, intensely flavored, designed to disguise meat that might be on the edge of turning. One sauce is black with blood and spices. Another is bright green with herbs pounded to paste. A third shimmers gold, thickened with egg yolks and saffron that cost more than the pot it's cooked in. Between the fires, you notice the smoke ventilation system, which is to say, there isn't one. Smoke just sort of finds its way out. Or doesn't. The blackened ceiling beams suggest that much of it stays, accumulating like regret. You realize that if you worked in this kitchen for any length of time, you'd develop a cough that would follow you to your grave, which, statistically, wouldn't be far off.
Hygiene is aspirational. Hands are wiped on aprons, knives are rinsed between uses, sometimes. The floor is strewn with rushes that soak up spills and hide filth until they're swept out, weekly, if you're lucky. You see a rat scurry along the wall, unbothered by the activity. One of the cats gives chase, half-heartedly. The rat escapes, the cat returns to its nap. Life goes on. Water comes from the well, hauled up in buckets by servants whose backs will give out before they're 30. It's used for cooking, cleaning, and drinking, though the drinking is usually disguised with wine or ale because everyone knows that straight water is dicey. The medieval understanding of germs is approximately 0, but experience teaches that water from certain sources makes you sick, so you avoid it, or boil it, or just drink beer and hope for the best. You watch the evening meal come together. A roast pig, its skin crackling, stewed vegetables in a sauce thick as mortar, pies filled with everything from apples to minced organs you'd rather not identify, bread in a dozen varieties, cheese from the dairy, aged until it's more weapon than food, fish fried in butter until they are unrecognizable as anything that once swam. Mathilde tastes everything, her spoon moving like a conductor's baton. Too much salt? Add water. Not enough spice? Send a boy running for the locked cabinet. The soup is thin? Throw in more barley and pray the Lord doesn't notice. She's solving problems in real time, adjusting recipes that exist only in her head, compensating for ingredients that didn't arrive, or arrived spoiled, or arrived but were immediately stolen by someone hoping to turn a profit. As the food is plated, and by plated I mean thrown onto serving dishes with whatever garnish is handy, you see the dance of service begin. Servants line up, hierarchically organized. The best dishes go to the high table, carried by the most trusted servants. Lesser dishes go to lesser tables. The kitchen staff will eat last, picking at leftovers, supplementing their meals with bread and whatever they can sneak when Mathilde is not looking. You ask one of the older servants what happens to uneaten food. He laughs, a bitter sound. Nothing goes uneaten. If it doesn't get eaten by guests, it's eaten by staff. If staff won't eat it, it goes to the dogs. If the dogs won't eat it, it goes to the pigs. If the pigs won't eat it, then it probably shouldn't have been cooked in the first place, and someone will answer for it. The meal ends. Dishes return empty or nearly so, and the kitchen doesn't stop. There's cleanup, mountains of it. Pots to scrub, tables to wipe, floors to sweep, fires to bank for the night. The process takes hours. By the time the last pot is clean, it's nearly time to start preparing breakfast. You leave the kitchen as you found it. Hot, smoky, loud, and utterly essential. This is where the palace's power is literally cooked up. Feasts impress visitors, secure alliances, demonstrate wealth. And all of it depends on people like Mathilde and her army of servants, working themselves to exhaustion for wages that barely cover their bread. As you climb back toward your room, you realize the medieval palace is less a place of luxury and more a machine that runs on human labor, animal suffering, and enough fire to keep everyone constantly afraid of burning down. The food was good, you'll admit, but knowing how it's made, knowing what goes into every bite, makes you wonder if ignorance might have been the better meal. The invitation arrives in the afternoon, delivered by a page whose livery is cleaner than anything you own. The Lord requests your presence in the royal apartments this evening. Not a request, really, more like a summons dressed in courtesy. You're to attend a private gathering, nobles only, which means you've been judged worthy or useful or possibly just entertaining enough to include. You dress carefully, in your best clothes, which are still shabby by palace standards, but at least don't smell like the stables. A servant appears to guide you through corridors you didn't know existed, up staircases that spiral into the upper reaches of the palace. The air changes here. Warmer, from braziers burning expensive coal. Sweeter, from herbs strewn on the floors. Quieter, because raised voices are for common people. The royal apartments are a different world. These rooms have glass in the windows, actual glass, wavy and precious, letting in light while keeping out weather. Tapestries cover the stone walls depicting hunting scenes and biblical stories in colors so vivid they seem alive. The furniture is carved, polished, expensive. Everything screams wealth in a carefully modulated tone. You're shown into an antechamber where several nobles already lounge on cushioned benches. They eye you with the casual assessment of people who spend their lives measuring everyone's worth. A duchess in silk that probably cost more than your horse. A bishop in robes so ornate they could double as architecture. A young earl who hasn't decided yet whether to be friendly or contemptuous. The conversation is sophisticated, layered with meanings you're only half catching. They discuss politics without mentioning names, affairs without stating specifics, the upcoming hunt, which is actually about property disputes, the recent marriage, which is actually about military alliances. You nod and smile and try to contribute without revealing how lost you are. Then the door opens, and the Lord enters his private chambers. You're ushered in with the others, and suddenly you're in the most private space in the entire palace, the royal bedchamber, where the Lord sleeps, schemes, and occasionally dies, depending on how ambitious his relatives are feeling. The bed dominates the room, like an altar. It's enormous, a wooden fortress with posts that reach toward the ceiling, hung with curtains so heavy they could serve as sails. The mattress is layered, straw on the bottom, then wool, then feathers from geese who died thinking they were contributing to something meaningful. Sheets of linen, white as snow, and probably washed by someone whose hands will never be clean again. The curtained beds serve multiple purposes. Privacy, obviously. Even lords need moments away from constant observation. Warmth, because drafts in a medieval palace are less gentle breeze and more hostile invasion. And security, because a curtained bed creates a small fortress within the fortress, a final barrier between the Lord and anyone who might wish him harm in the night. Around the bed, furniture clusters like courtiers. A chest for clothes, locked and bound in iron. A table for writing, with ink, quills, and a half-finished letter that you're careful not to read. A prayer bench facing a small altar, because piety is important, especially when your enemies might be praying too. Candlesticks, elaborate and expensive, because darkness is for peasants. The Lord holds court from his bedchamber, conducting business in a state of semi-undress that would scandalize anyone who didn't understand that proximity to power outweighs propriety. He sits on the edge of the bed, still wearing his day clothes, and discusses the affairs of the estate with the same casualness you'd discuss weather. You learn that the bedchamber is the ultimate inner sanctum. Being invited here means you're trusted, valued, or at least temporarily useful. The Lord's advisors gather here for private counsels. His physician visits here for examinations. His priest comes for confession. And when the Lord is feeling particularly trusting or particularly drunk, his friends gather for games, conversations, and the kind of honest talk that would be dangerous in the hall. But privacy is relative. Even in the bedchamber, servants hover. A body servant, responsible for helping the Lord dress and undress. A chamberlain, managing the room's operations. A guard outside the door, because even in your own room, in your own palace, you're never truly safe. Medieval nobility sleeps with one eye open, metaphorically and sometimes literally. The sleeping arrangements fascinate you. The Lord doesn't sleep alone, not for warmth, but for security. A trusted servant often sleeps on a pallet at the foot of the bed or in an adjoining chamber, ready to respond to threats or needs. This servant is, in theory, loyal unto death. In practice, this servant is a security risk who knows all your secrets and could be bribed, blackmailed, or simply decide that someone else would pay better. You notice the chamber pot, ornate and brass, positioned discreetly behind a screen. Medieval plumbing is mostly aspirational. There might be a garderobe, a primitive toilet that drops waste into a pit or moat below, but at night, in winter, When the garderobe is a cold walk away, the chamber pot becomes the noble's closest friend. Servants empty it in the morning, a job that ranks somewhere below scullery maid and above definitely going to die young. The Lord discusses his sleep routine, and you realize medieval bedtime is a production. First, the evening meal, consumed in the hall, then private business in the chamber, letters written, meetings held, prayers said. Then the elaborate process of undressing, which involves a servant removing layer after layer of clothing until the Lord is down to his linen undergarments. The bed is checked before climbing in. Servants shake out the mattresses looking for scorpions, spiders, rats, and other guests who weren't invited. They warm the sheets with hot coals in a warming pan, a copper vessel on a long handle that's waved over the linens like a blessing. The curtains are drawn, creating a small tent of relative warmth and safety. Sleep itself is fragmented. Medieval people didn't sleep through the night the way modern people do. They slept in segments. First sleep from dusk until midnight or so, then a wakeful period for prayer, conversation, or worrying about enemies, then second sleep until dawn. This pattern was so universal that legal documents mentioned first sleep and second sleep as standard markers of time. During the wakeful period, the bedchamber comes alive. The Lord might read by candlelight, pray, discuss matters with the servants, or simply lie awake contemplating mortality, taxes, and whether his son is plotting against him. The lady, if she's sharing the bed, might use this time for her own purposes, conversations with the Lord, prayers, or simply enjoying a rare moment when no one is watching her. But the bedchamber isn't just for sleeping. It's also where illness is tended, where physicians bleed patients in the belief that excess blood causes disease, where birth happens with all its gore and danger, where death comes, sometimes naturally, sometimes not. You watch as the Lord receives his physician, a man in dark robes who carries bags of dubious instruments. The physician examines him with the confidence of someone who has no idea what he's doing, but has been doing it for years. He checks the Lord's pulse, examines his tongue, sniffs his breath. He consults astrological charts to determine the best time for bloodletting, because obviously the stars care about your medical appointments. The physician recommends a course of treatment that involves leeches. Not metaphorical leeches, actual leeches, black and writhing, kept in a jar like nightmares made flesh. The Lord agrees wearily, and the leeches are applied to his temples, his neck, his arms. They latch on with their tiny teeth and begin their work, swelling as they feed, while everyone in the room tries to look like this is perfectly normal medical practice and not at all horrifying. After the bloodletting, the physician prescribes a tonic, herbs mixed with wine, designed to restore balance to the humors. What are humors? No one's entirely sure, but the medieval medical profession has built an entire industry around balancing them. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Get them wrong and you're sick. Get them right and you're probably still sick, but at least you tried. The bedroom conversation turns to dreams. Medieval people take dreams seriously, interpreting them as messages from God, warnings from the devil, or simply reflections of the day's eating habits. The Lord describes a dream about hunting, which the bishop interprets as a sign of impending success. The Duchess counters with her own dream about a black dog, which everyone agrees is ominous but can't quite decode. You're invited to share your sleeping space, not with the Lord, that would be absurd, but with other guests in a nearby chamber. This room is smaller, less luxurious, but still impressive by your standards. Several beds line the walls, each screened by curtains for modesty, if not privacy. You'll be sharing the space with the Earl and a visiting knight, both of whom snore, you're warned, like congested bears. As night deepens, the palace's sounds change. The distant bark of dogs, the closer rattle of dice in a guardroom, footsteps on stone, echoing in ways that make it impossible to tell if someone is approaching or leaving. The wind finds every crack in the walls. whistling a tune that's less lullaby and more warning. You lie in your curtained bed, listening to the night snore, the earl mutter in his sleep, and the general ambiance of a medieval palace trying to rest. Somewhere below, servants are still working. Somewhere above, the Lord is lying in his curtained fortress, surrounded by his closest advisors and most trusted assassins, wondering who he can really trust. The medieval bedchamber is a paradox. It's the most private space in the palace and the most surveilled, the most luxurious and the most vulnerable, the place where power rests and where power is most at risk. You pull your blanket tighter and think about the Lord in his great bed, surrounded by feathers and fear, trying to sleep while knowing that every snore might be his last. Because in a medieval palace, the bedroom isn't just where you sleep. It's where you demonstrate wealth, conduct business, receive medical torture, and, if you're very unlucky, meet your end via poison, pillow, or plot. Sleep well, if you can. Dawn is still hours away, and dawn in a medieval palace brings its own fresh set of dangers. Part 4. The Court Physician, Medieval Medicine and Its Discontents. Morning arrives with church bells, and the smell of someone cooking something that might be breakfast or might be an alchemical experiment. You're summoned, there's always a summoning, to attend the physician's rounds. The court physician, it turns out, holds daily consultations in a chamber that doubles as torture room and laboratory, though the line between those two functions is remarkably blurry. The physician's chamber reeks. Herbs hang from the ceiling in dried bundles, their leaves brittle as old thoughts. Jars line the shelves filled with substances you'd rather not identify, powders, liquids, what might be preserved organs floating in murky fluid. A skeleton hangs in the corner, academic proof that the physician has at least seen the inside of a human body, even if his understanding of how it works is mostly guesswork dressed in Latin. The physician himself is a small man with careful hands and the kind of beard that suggests wisdom, or at least an unwillingness to shave. He wears dark robes that hide stains from previous patients, and he greets you with the professional courtesy of someone who's seen it all and been impressed by none of it. His name is Bernard, and he's been the court physician for 15 years, which means he's either very good or very lucky, and you suspect it's mostly the latter. His assistant is a young man training in the medical arts, learning through observation and occasionally fainting when the blood gets too enthusiastic. The assistant's main job seems to be handing Bernard tools and looking appropriately serious when Bernard makes pronouncements about the state of someone's humors. The first patient is a lady in waiting with a persistent cough. She's been coughing for weeks, she says, a delicate confession delivered between decorative handkerchiefs. Bernard nods sagely, asks about her diet, her dreams, whether she's been exposed to bad air or immoral thoughts. The diagnosis comes swiftly, an excess of phlegm, one of the 4 humors, probably caused by eating too much fish or not praying enough. The treatment is equally swift. Bernard prescribes a syrup made from honey, herbs, and what he calls theriac, a compound so complex it contains upwards of 60 ingredients, including viper flesh, opium, and whatever else the apothecary had lying around. The lady will take a spoonful 3 times daily, after prayers, and return in a week to report her progress, or more likely her continued decline. Next comes a knight with a wound from training. The cut on his forearm is angry, red, weeping fluid that doesn't look like anything that should come from a human body. Bernard examines it with the detachment of someone inspecting a particularly dull rock, then announces that the wound has corrupt humors and must be cleaned. The cleaning process involves wine, sensible, and then cauterization with a hot iron, less sensible, but at least dramatic. The assistant heats the iron in a brazier until it glows. The knight grips the table's edge with his good hand, jaw set. Bernard applies the iron with practiced speed. There's a hiss, a smell like a badly managed barbecue, and a grunt from the knight who's determined not to scream, because screaming is for people who aren't knights. The wound is then packed with a poultice made from bread mold, honey, and crushed herbs. Modern medicine will eventually discover that bread mold contains natural antibiotics, but Bernard doesn't know that. He just knows that sometimes this works and sometimes the patient dies, and that ratio is good enough to keep him employed. A servant arrives with a more delicate case, a nobleman who won't say what's wrong, but whose posture suggests problems in the nether regions. Bernard dismisses you and the other observers with a wave, and the door closes on what you suspect is a case of something venereal, because syphilis and gonorrhea are as common in medieval courts as gossip, and both spread through similar channels. While waiting for Bernard to finish, you explore his shelves. One jar contains leeches, swimming in murky water, waiting for their next appointment. Another holds dried toads, which Bernard uses for various ailments, on the theory that if it's disgusting enough, it must be medicinal. There are vials of mercury, powders of antimony, chunks of sulfur, and a suspicious amount of lead, all of which are toxic, but excellent for demonstrating that you're doing something. The medical texts stacked on a table are hand-copied manuscripts, beautiful and wrong. They repeat theories from ancient Greece and Rome, Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, with the reverence usually reserved for scripture. The human body, according to these texts, is governed by 4 humors that must be balanced like a particularly temperamental recipe. Too much blood, bloodletting. Too much phlegm, purging. Too much bile, more purging. Medieval medicine has never met a problem it couldn't solve by removing something from the body. Bernard emerges, washing his hands in a basin of water that's already been used several times today, and invites you to accompany him on his morning rounds through the palace. This, he explains, is where his real work happens, not treating disease, but preventing it, or at least appearing to prevent it, which amounts to the same thing in terms of job security. The first stop is the nursery, where the Lord's youngest children are kept under the watchful eyes of nurses who treat them like porcelain that might shatter if looked at wrong. Bernard examines each child with practiced efficiency, checking teeth, looking at tongues, feeling pulses, and making vague pronouncements about temperaments and constitutions.
One child has a fever. Bernard prescribes rest, light food, and a poultice on the chest. He also recommends prayer because while medicine might fail, divine intervention is worth a shot. The nurses nod seriously, as if Bernard has shared profound wisdom rather than the medieval equivalent of "try not to die." You move to the Lord's elderly mother, who occupies a suite of rooms that smell like old age and expensive incense trying to cover it. She's a formidable woman who's outlived 3 husbands and shows no signs of accommodating a 4th, death included. Her complaints are numerous: aching joints, poor sleep, a general sense that the world is declining in quality since her youth. Bernard listens with the patience of someone who's had this conversation many times before. He recommends a tonic for the joints, wine infused with willow bark, which actually contains a precursor to aspirin, though Bernard doesn't know that. For the sleep, he suggests warm milk with poppy syrup, which will definitely help her sleep, possibly permanently if the dose gets ambitious. For her general dissatisfaction with modernity, he has no remedy, because some problems are beyond even medieval medicine's creative reach. The tour continues through the palace's human inventory. A guard with a toothache. Bernard recommends extraction, which means tying a string around the tooth, tying the other end to a door, and slamming the door. Elegant, if not exactly comfortable. A maid with mysterious stomach pains, probably from the kitchen's hygiene standards, But Bernard diagnoses wandering womb because medieval medicine believes women's organs have the navigation skills of confused tourists. You watch Bernard perform bloodletting on a lord's brother who suffers from what sounds like high blood pressure but is diagnosed as excess sanguinity. Bernard uses a lancet to open a vein in the man's arm, collecting blood in a brass bowl marked with measurements. The patient goes pale, then paler, then agrees that he does feel better, probably because losing consciousness feels like relief when your options are limited. The bloodletting equipment is fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. Lancets of varying sizes, from delicate needles to blades that look capable of field surgery. Scarificators, devices with multiple spring-loaded blades that create patterns of cuts for more efficient bleeding. And of course, the leeches, which Bernard prefers for facial work because they're more precise than blades and less likely to leave scars, though they do leave the patient looking like they've been attacked by tiny vampires. Bernard explains his philosophy as you walk. The body, he says, is a system that must be kept in balance. Disease is imbalance, too much of one humor, not enough of another, bad air, bad food, bad thoughts, bad luck. Treatment is about restoration, using the tools available: bloodletting, purging, sweating, blistering, and the occasional amputation when things get really out of hand. Amputation comes up because you've arrived at the barber-surgeon's chamber, a separate domain from Bernard's. The barber-surgeon is a rougher sort, trained through apprenticeship rather than books, his hands calloused from holding razors and saws. He handles the messy work, pulling teeth, setting bones, removing arrows, and cutting off limbs when they've gone too far beyond saving. You watch a demonstration on a man whose leg is so infected that the smell precedes him into the room. The barber-surgeon examines the leg with professional detachment, then delivers his verdict: it has to come off. The patient, who's probably been expecting this, simply nods and asks for wine. The procedure is medieval surgery at its finest, which is to say, brutal and efficient. The patient drinks enough wine to achieve a state somewhere between drunk and unconscious. Assistants hold him down. The barber-surgeon works with remarkable speed. A tourniquet above the knee, a circular cut through skin and muscle, a saw through bone, all accomplished in less time than it takes to properly roast a chicken. The stump is cauterized with hot oil, a process that produces smoke, screams, and a smell you'll remember every time you think about medieval healthcare. Then it's bandaged, the patient is carried away, and the barber-surgeon cleans his tools with wine and prayer, in that order. Bernard watches with academic interest, occasionally offering commentary. The barber-surgeon listens politely, ignores most of it, and continues doing what's worked for him. There's a professional tension between the university-trained physician and the practically trained surgeon, each believing the other is approximately one step above a charlatan. You ask Bernard about his success rate. He pauses, choosing words carefully. Success, he explains, is complicated. Many patients recover, though whether that's because of his treatments or despite them is a question he doesn't examine too closely. Many die, but they were going to die anyway, probably, and at least his treatments gave their families the comfort of knowing something was done. The afternoon brings a consultation with an astrologer, because medieval medicine believes the stars influence health as surely as diet and prayer. The astrologer spreads charts across a table, calculating optimal times for bloodletting, surgery, and conception. Apparently, cutting someone open when Mars is ascendant is asking for trouble, while Saturn favors purging the bowels. It's astronomy meets gastroenterology, and no one sees anything odd about this. Bernard shows you his own chart, cast at his birth, which supposedly reveals his temperament, his vulnerabilities, and his ideal career path. The fact that he became a physician was, he insists, written in the stars, which seems like a convenient way to avoid responsibility for your choices, but also provides excellent job satisfaction. The palace's pharmacy is your next stop, a locked room where the apothecary stores his ingredients. Shelves hold jars of everything: dried plants, ground minerals, preserved animal parts, imported spices, and a disturbing number of things labeled unicorn horn, which are definitely not from unicorns because unicorns don't exist, but rhino horn and narwhal tusk make excellent placebos.
The apothecary is meticulous, measuring ingredients with scales so precise they'd impress a modern pharmacist. He's mixing a batch of theriac, the cure-all remedy that supposedly treats everything from plague to melancholy. The recipe requires him to age the mixture for years, which conveniently means any failures won't be his problem for quite some time. You sample some of the less lethal medicines: a cough syrup that tastes like licorice and regret, a headache powder that's probably just ground willow bark which actually works, a digestive aid that's definitely going to cause more problems than it solves. The medieval pharmacy is a place where hope, desperation, and commerce meet in a jar and get sold for more than they're worth. Bernard concludes your tour in his private study, where he keeps his most valuable texts and his most complicated cases. He shows you drawings of internal organs, some accurate, many wildly wrong. He explains the theory of signatures, the belief that God marked plants with signs of their uses, so walnuts, which look like brains, must treat head ailments. Carrots, which look like eyes, must improve vision. It's magical thinking dressed in medical terminology, and it's taken seriously by everyone. His case notes are equally fascinating. Patient after patient, their symptoms described in flowery language, their treatments detailed with precision, their outcomes often vague. Recovered might mean fully healed or just stopped complaining. Died is unambiguous, but death's causes are often attributed to fate, God's will, or astrological misfortune rather than medical incompetence. You ask Bernard if he ever doubts his methods. He admits, in a rare moment of honesty, that medicine is as much art as science, more guesswork than certainty. But people need answers, even wrong ones. They need to believe someone understands their suffering, even if that understanding is built on ancient texts and wishful thinking. So he does what he can with what he knows and hopes that's enough. As evening approaches, you leave Bernard to his consultations and his doubts. The physician's life is one of constant demand: nobles who expect miracles, servants who expect anything, everyone expecting him to hold back death with nothing more than leeches and conviction. You return to your room feeling simultaneously grateful for modern medicine and oddly respectful of medieval physicians who tried their best with terrible tools. They couldn't cure plague, or prevent infection, or understand germ theory, but they showed up every day, mixed their tonics, applied their leeches, and told their patients that everything would be fine. Sometimes it even was, not often enough to call it good medicine, but often enough to keep people coming back. Because in a medieval palace where death lurks in every draught and disease in every meal, even bad medicine is better than no medicine at all, even if that medicine involves toads, star charts, and theories about humors that make approximately zero sense. You sleep that night dreaming of leeches and lancets, grateful that your cough is just a cough and not an invitation to be bled, purged, and consulted over by men who think your liver is governed by Jupiter. Medieval medicine did its best. Its best was often terrible, but at least it was trying, which is more than you can say for the plague. The summons comes in the morning, delivered by a guard whose expression suggests this isn't a social call. The Lord requires your presence in the lower chambers, not the nice chambers, the chambers below, where stone sweats and light forgets to visit. You're to witness the administration of justice, which is medieval code for watching someone have a very bad day. The descent is literal and metaphorical. Stairs spiral down into the palace's foundations, each step taking you deeper into darkness and damp. The air changes, colder, heavier, carrying smells that make your stomach question its commitment to breakfast. Torch smoke, human waste, old blood, and fear aged into the stones like wine in a cask. The dungeon isn't one room, but a warrant of chambers, each with its own specialized purpose. Holding cells for common criminals, nicer cells for noble prisoners who have fallen from favor but might yet be ransomed, and the special rooms, the ones without names, where questions are asked and answers are extracted with tools that make medieval medicine look gentle. Your guide is the dungeon keeper, a man built like a wall and possessed of the personality to match. His name is Godfrey, though everyone calls him the Keeper, which sounds biblical and probably isn't meant to. He's been in this position for decades, outlasting 3 lords and countless prisoners, his face a map of neutrality that suggests he's seen too much to be shocked by anything. The first cell you pass holds a man accused of theft. He sits in straw that's been there longer than he has, his wrists bound, his ankles chained to an iron ring set into the wall. The cell is maybe 6 feet by 8, with a bucket for sanitation that hasn't been emptied recently. No furniture, no light, except what leaks through the door's grate. This is what awaiting trial looks like in a medieval palace. The keeper explains the dungeon's economics. Prisoners are responsible for their own upkeep: food, water, blankets, even the straw they sleep on. If you have money or family, you can buy comfort. If you don't, you exist on whatever charity the guards feel like providing, which is approximately none. The rich suffer in style. The poor just suffer. Further down, you encounter the oubliette, which comes from the French oublier, to forget. It's a pit, basically, a hole in the floor covered by a grate where prisoners are lowered and then forgotten. No trial, no release, just a dark hole where you sit until you die or go mad, whichever comes first. The keeper lifts the grate, and you peer down into blackness that breathes. Someone's down there. You can hear them shifting, muttering prayers or curses. It's hard to tell. The keeper drops the grate back with a clang that echoes like a period on a sentence. That one, he says casually, was caught plotting against the Lord's nephew. Or maybe he wasn't, but someone said he was, and that's close enough for oubliette justice. You ask how long he's been down there? The keeper shrugs. Time works differently in the oubliette. Days blend into weeks, weeks into eternity. Eventually, either the Lord remembers you exist or he doesn't. The torture chamber is surprisingly clean. You expected medieval horror, blood on the walls, implements scattered like toys. Instead, you find organization, tools arranged by purpose, each one maintained with a care usually reserved for weapons. The rack stands in the center like a horrible bed, its rollers greased, its ropes ready. Along the walls, thumb screws, pincers, whips, and devices whose purposes you can only guess at and would rather not.
A prisoner is brought in, a man accused of heresy. He's thin, dirty, trembling. 2 guards hold him upright while a clerk reads the charges: spreading false doctrine, questioning the church's authority, possessing forbidden texts. The prisoner denies everything, with the fervor of someone who knows denial won't matter, but has to try anyway. The Lord arrives, accompanied by his steward and a priest. This is justice as theater, performed for an audience that includes you and several other nobles who've come to watch the way modern people attend sporting events. The Lord sits in a chair positioned specifically for viewing, his face arranged in an expression of stern concern. The interrogation begins with questions. The prisoner answers. His answers are deemed unsatisfactory. The keeper sighs, selects a tool, thumbscrews, simple and effective, and applies them with professional efficiency. The prisoner screams. The questions continue. Different answers now. Panicked, contradictory, still unsatisfactory. You watch, stomach churning, as medieval justice does its work. The rack is employed. The prisoner is stretched, joints popping, tendons straining. He confesses to everything: heresy, treason, consorting with demons, probably stealing the Lord's favorite horse, if anyone bothered to ask.
Confessions extracted under torture are famously unreliable. But reliability isn't the point. The point is demonstration. The point is fear. The keeper explains his craft with disturbing pride. Torture, he says, is an art. Apply too little, and the prisoner doesn't talk. Apply too much, and they die before confession, which makes you look bad. The key is finding the sweet spot between agony and endurance, keeping the prisoner conscious and vocal. It requires skill, patience, and a complete absence of empathy. He shows you his tools, with the enthusiasm of a craftsman displaying his workshop. Thumb screws crush bones slowly. The strappado dislocates shoulders. The rack elongates the spine. Each tool has its advocates, its optimal application, its success rate measured in confessions per hour. The medieval torture chamber is efficiency meets cruelty, with detailed notes kept for future reference. Between torture sessions, prisoners are returned to cells to contemplate their choices. Medical care is provided, not for mercy, but pragmatism. Dead prisoners can't be questioned further or publicly executed. Bernard the physician sometimes visits, treating wounds inflicted in the torture chamber so they can be reopened later. It's a circular horror that benefits everyone except the prisoner. You're shown the Iron Maiden, though the keeper admits it's mostly for show. The famous spiked sarcophagus that impales victims is more myth than practice. Too quick, too final, not enough confession time. But it looks impressive, standing in the corner like a medieval marketing tool, promising horrors that are actually more sophisticated than simple impalement. The questioning continues. More prisoners, more accusations. A woman accused of witchcraft. She made her neighbor's cow stop giving milk through what the neighbor insists was supernatural means, but was probably just the cow being old. A man accused of adultery with a noblewoman. He claims innocence. The evidence is a letter that might be his handwriting or might not be. The noblewoman is notably absent from these proceedings. The keeper demonstrates the water torture, which sounds gentle until you realize it means drowning someone repeatedly without quite killing them. The prisoner is strapped to a board, tilted back, water poured over their face through cloth. They choke, gag, panic. Then they're tilted upright, given a chance to confess. They don't. The process repeats, and repeats, and repeats. You notice the priest standing nearby, offering prayers between screams. His presence serves multiple purposes: spiritual comfort, official witness, and the implicit endorsement of the Church, which has its own history of enthusiastic interrogation. The Inquisition isn't just Spanish. It's everywhere the Church suspects heresy, and suspicion is generous with its geography. Some prisoners break quickly. Others hold out, either from genuine innocence or superhuman stubbornness. One man endures the rack, the thumbscrews, and the strappado before finally confessing that yes, he did speak against the Lord, yes, he deserves punishment, yes, he'll say anything if they just stop. His confession is recorded by the clerk with bureaucratic precision, witnessed, sealed, justice documented for posterity. The punishments are scheduled for later: public executions, whippings, brandings. Medieval justice believes in spectacle. Punishment isn't just about the criminal, it's about the crowd. Make them watch. Make them remember. Make them afraid to step out of line. The gallows in the courtyard, the pillory in the market square, the stocks outside the church, these are medieval deterrents, as much theater as justice. You're taken to meet a special prisoner, held in a cell that's slightly nicer than the others. This man is noble, captured in battle, held for ransom. He's treated well, relatively speaking. He has a bed, proper food, even books. But he's still a prisoner, still locked behind iron, still at the Lord's mercy. His family is negotiating his release, a process that involves letters, lawyers, and large sums of money changing hands slowly. The noble prisoner explains his situation with rueful humor, He's been here 6 months, long enough to know every stone in his cell, every routine of the guards. He's learned patience the hard way. His family will pay eventually, or won't, and then his situation becomes significantly worse. Medieval imprisonment for nobility is business transaction. For everyone else, it's just imprisonment. The keeper shows you his record books, ledgers where every prisoner is documented. Name, crime, date of imprisonment, treatment prescribed, outcome. Some outcomes are release. Many are execution. Some are simple notations. Died, with no explanation of how or why, because explanations are for people who matter.
You ask about false accusations. The keeper shrugs. False? True? Does it matter? If the Lord believes you're guilty, you're guilty. If powerful people want you removed, you're removed. Justice in a medieval palace is whatever the Lord says it is, backed by iron and torture and men like the keeper who ask no questions about innocence or guilt. The tour ends in the execution chamber, though chamber is generous. It's more of a room with a drain and questionable stains. This is where beheadings happen when the weather is bad or the Lord doesn't want a public spectacle. The block sits ready, wood worn smooth by countless necks. The axe leans against the wall, blade honed to efficiency, if not mercy. The keeper describes the process. The prisoner kneels, lays their head on the block. The executioner swings. Usually, it takes one blow. Sometimes two. Once in a while, more, which is unfortunate for everyone involved. The fastest execution he's witnessed was a single clean stroke. The slowest was 5 blows and a lot of screaming. Skill matters in beheading, and not all executioners are created equal. You leave the dungeon as afternoon light streams through high windows, a reminder that the world above continues regardless of the horrors below. The smell stays with you. Stone, damp, fear. The sounds echo. Screams, chains, the keeper's calm explanations delivered like a market vendor describing vegetables. The medieval dungeon is where the palace's polite fiction about law and order drops its mask. Justice here is about power, control, and making examples. Trials are formalities. Torture extracts confessions regardless of truth. Punishment is public, painful, and designed to remind everyone who's in charge. As you climb back toward light and air, you realize the dungeon is the palace's foundation in more than one sense. Everything above, the feasts, the bedchambers, the physicians' rounds, rests on this basement of fear. The Lord's authority isn't just about silk and ceremony. It's about knowing that beneath the dancing and the dining, there's a place where people disappear into darkness and don't come back. You wash your hands in cold water, trying to scrub away the feeling of the dungeon stones. But some sensations don't wash off. Some stay with you, reminders that medieval justice was a performance of cruelty, and everyone, torturer, victim, witness, played their part whether they wanted to or not. Your final night in the medieval palace begins with fanfare, literally. Trumpets announce the evening's grand feast, a celebration of something or other. Maybe a victory in battle, maybe a saint's day, maybe just the Lord feeling particularly lordly and wanting to remind everyone of his magnificence. The reason doesn't matter as much as the spectacle. The great hall has been transformed. Every surface gleams from hours of scrubbing. Fresh rushes cover the floors, mixed with herbs that release scents when trampled. Tapestries have been dusted, candlesticks polished, the high table draped in the best linens. Servants swarm like organized ants, setting out trenchers, arranging cups, triple-checking that every fork and knife is in its proper place. Not that there are many forks. Forks are still suspiciously foreign. Knives and fingers remain the utensils of choice. You're assigned a seat at a lower table, among the lesser nobility and important merchants. Better than you expected, honestly. You're positioned where you can see the high table, but not quite hear their conversations, which is probably for the best.
Knowing what nobles discuss over swan might ruin your appetite or get you imprisoned, depending on how sensitive the topics are. The hall fills gradually. Nobles drift in wearing their finest velvets, silks, furs that cost more than most people earn in lifetimes. Jewelry glints in candlelight. Perfume battles with the underlying palace smell of smoke, humanity, and questionable hygiene. Everyone smiles, everyone nods, everyone watches everyone else with the intensity of predators calculating distances.
The Lord arrives last, as is proper. He enters in full regalia, a costume of authority that includes a hat so elaborate you wonder how he fits through doorways. His lady follows, serene and glittering, jewels catching light like tiny captive stars. They take their places at the high table, and suddenly everyone sits in a choreographed wave of rustling fabric. The feast begins with prayers, delivered by a bishop whose voice could wake the dead, which is fitting since some of the food will shortly contribute to that demographic. The prayers are thorough, thanking God for his bounty, blessing the Lord for his generosity, asking protection from enemies visible and invisible. Then the eating can commence. First course, subtleties, which are less food and more edible sculptures. A castle made of marzipan, complete with tiny towers and a drawbridge that actually draws. A ship fashioned from pastry, its sails made of sugar, riding waves of spun caramel. These aren't meant to be eaten immediately, they're meant to be admired, photographed mentally, discussed in awed whispers. Eventually they'll be dismantled and distributed, but for now they're art. Then the real food begins arriving. Soups first, broths thick with barley and mystery meats. You sip carefully, mindful of temperature and ingredients. The merchant beside you attacks his bowl with enthusiasm, which you take as a sign that poison is not on tonight's menu. Probably. Roasted birds come next, peacocks and swans and geese, arranged to look almost alive. The peacock is a particular triumph. Its feathers have been removed, the bird roasted, and the feathers sewn back on, so it appears to stride across the platter in full plumage. It's absurd. It's excessive. It's exactly what medieval nobility loves. You carve off a piece of swan and discover it tastes, well, like swan, which is to say like poultry that's been working out and holds grudges. The meat is dark, rich, slightly gamey. The sauce helps, a thick concoction of wine, spices, and breadcrumbs that turns everything into the same medieval taste profile. Expensive, complicated, and aggressively spiced to prove you can afford imported pepper. Fish arrives despite it being a meat day, because why not serve both? Pike in a green sauce, the fish arranged to look like it's swimming through a river of parade herbs. Lampreys in their own blood, which is apparently a delicacy if you don't think too hard about what you're eating. Oysters served raw, each one a potential bout of food poisoning waiting to happen. The servers moving practiced coordination, replacing empty platters with full ones, refilling cups with wine that grows darker and stronger as the evening progresses. You notice the Lord's taster still at work, sampling each dish before it reaches the high table, waiting the prescribed interval to ensure no sudden death occurs. It's morbidly fascinating to watch someone whose job description includes "might die for your lunch." Meat courses follow in overwhelming succession. Venison in a rich sauce, the Lord having demonstrated his hunting prowess by killing something majestic. Boar, its head mounted on a platter with an apple in its mouth, tusks polished to threatening gleam. Beef, mutton, pork, each prepared differently, roasted, stewed, baked in pies whose crusts are architectural achievements. The pies deserve special attention. Some are simple meat pies, hearty and filling. Others are elaborately constructed, a 4-and-20 blackbirds pie, where live birds are actually baked into the crust, in a separate compartment thankfully, and fly out when the pie is opened, to general amazement and the birds' extreme confusion. It's entertainment and dinner combined, peak medieval efficiency. Between courses, entertainers perform. Acrobats tumble through the hall, coming dangerously close to the tables and the candles, their acts a combination of skill and suicidal bravery.
Musicians play, lutes, harps, drums, creating a medieval soundscape that's surprisingly sophisticated. Singers deliver ballads about love and war, carefully edited to praise the Lord and flatter his family. The fool performs with razor wit, jokes that cut close to truth but dance away before anyone can take offense. He mocks the Lord's enemies, satirizes foreign customs, makes bawdy references that sail over the children's heads and land squarely in the adults' laps. People laugh, sometimes nervously, always watching the Lord to gauge acceptable response. As the evening progresses, discipline erodes, voices grow louder, laughter comes easier. People start eating with their hands more freely, the pretense of proper manners drowning in wine. You notice some nobles becoming exceptionally friendly with servants, which will probably create awkward situations tomorrow morning. A servant approaches you with a platter of something that looked like it might have been beautiful before it was cooked, carved, and sauced to an inch of its life. You accept a portion and realize you're eating tongue. Beef tongue, mercifully, not human, though at this point you're not sure you could tell the difference. The high table is a theater unto itself. The Lord holds court, telling stories that everyone laughs at, whether they're funny or not. His lady engages in quiet conversations with neighboring nobles, each word a chess move in social games whose rules you can only guess at. A bishop eats with holy enthusiasm, proving that piety doesn't preclude gluttony. Advisors lean in for whispered consultations, possibly about politics, possibly about who's drunk enough to be interesting. You notice tension developing. A young lord and an older baron exchange looks that could curdle milk. Something about a border dispute you overhear, or a broken betrothal, or an insult delivered at a previous feast. The tension simmers while everyone pretends not to notice, because a brawl at dinner would be terribly gauche. Sweet courses arrive as the meal enters its final phase. Custards and tarts, cookies shaped like heraldic symbols, candied fruits that cost their weight in silver. A towering confection of sugar and marzipan depicts the Lord's castle in miniature, each tower perfect, each window a tiny sugar pane. It's too beautiful to eat, which means it will be destroyed within the hour. The wine flows with abandon now. Cups are refilled by servants who move like ghosts, there but not there, seeing everything, saying nothing. You've switched to water, or what passes for water, because staying sober at a medieval feast is survival strategy. Around you, others have abandoned such caution. Conversations grow philosophical, then nonsensical, then combative. The tension you noticed earlier erupts. The young lord stands, face flushed, and accuses the baron of something. The words are slurred, but the intent is clear. The baron stands in response, hand dropping to where a sword would be if weapons were allowed at dinner, which they're not, though the gesture's meaning is universal. Guards materialize from the walls, moving to intercept. The lord at the high table raises his hand, a gesture that freezes everyone mid-motion. Silence falls like a dropped theater curtain. The lord speaks, voice carrying across the hall with practiced authority. His words are few, but their meaning is clear. Sit down, shut up, or leave his hall and his favor forever. The young lord sits. The baron sits. The moment passes, but its echo remains. You realize you've just witnessed the thin edge of violence that always underlies these gatherings. The feast is civilized only as long as everyone agrees to be civilized, and that agreement is renegotiated with every cup of wine. As midnight approaches, the feast shows no signs of ending. More food arrives. Another round of roasted birds, additional pies, a whole roasted lamb that's carried in by 4 servants struggling under its weight. The medieval feast operates on a principle of abundance bordering on violence. There's too much food, too much drink, too much everything, because excess is the point. The Lord demonstrates his wealth by wasting it so theatrically that waste becomes art. You step outside for air, leaving the hall's heat and noise for the courtyard's cold and quiet. Stars scatter across a black sky, indifferent to human drama. The palace walls loom, dark and solid, holding within them all the excess, all the danger, all the complicated politics of people who have too much power and too little to do with it except feast and feud. A servant joins you, a woman you recognize from the kitchen. She's taking her own break, stealing a moment between courses to breathe air that isn't smoke. You exchange nods, the silent acknowledgement of fellow survivors. She asks if you're enjoying the feast. You say yes, because what else do you say? She smiles knowingly and says, "The real feast is in the kitchen, where servants eat the good food that doesn't have to be presented prettily." You return to the hall as the entertainment reaches its climax. Fire breathers perform, their flames illuminating faces alternately amazed and terrified. A dancing bear, chained and miserable, performs tricks for scraps. Musicians launch into a complicated piece that requires 3 different instruments to play in harmony, achieving something that's either genius or organized noise, depending on your wine consumption. The final course is announced with fanfare. A massive pie, 5 feet in diameter, is carried into the hall by 6 servants. It's placed before the high table with ceremony usually reserved for coronations. The Lord stands, raises his knife, and cuts into the crust. The expected birds don't fly out. Instead, something else emerges. Water. Gushing from the pie's interior, flooding across the table. Chaos erupts. The water isn't just water, it's mixed with wine, turning the tablecloth purple. Servants rush forward with cloths, trying to contain the spill. The Lord's face transitions from surprise to rage in 3 seconds flat. Someone has sabotaged the feast, turned the final triumph into public humiliation. Guards sealed the doors. No one leaves until this is resolved. The hall falls into uneasy silence, broken only by the drip of wine water onto the floor. You realize that you're witnessing a disaster unfold in real time, and your role is to be silent, observant, and pray you're not somehow blamed for this. The investigation begins immediately. The head cook is summoned from the kitchen, arriving red-faced and terrified. She swears she prepared everything correctly. The pie was perfect when it left her domain. Something happened between kitchen and hall. Someone interfered. Accusations fly. The servers who carried the pie are questioned harshly. One admits he left the pie unattended for a moment, just a moment, while dealing with another emergency. That moment was enough. Someone approached the pie, did something, he didn't see what, and then disappeared into the crowd. The Lord's advisors confer in urgent whispers. This isn't just a ruined dessert. This is a message, a challenge, possibly the opening move in something darker. The wine-water mixture could have been poison. The fact that it wasn't suggests either mercy or incompetence, which is neither particularly comforting. You watch the high table scramble to maintain dignity. Servants wipe down the lord and lady, both of whom are splattered but unharmed. The purple tablecloth is removed, replaced with fresh linen. The ruined pie is carried away like a body from a battlefield. The feast will continue, because stopping would admit defeat. But the mood has changed. The laughter is forced now. Conversations are guarded. Everyone watches everyone else with renewed suspicion. The young lord who argued earlier is questioned. Did he orchestrate this as revenge? He denies it vehemently, but his denials are noted for future reference. The baron is questioned. Was this his response to the earlier confrontation? He appears genuinely shocked, but appearances in a medieval palace are cheap currency. The servants are taken aside one by one. You don't see where they go, but you can guess. The keeper's domain, where questions are asked more persistently than they are in the hall. You hope for their sake that whoever sabotaged the pie is found quickly, because innocent servants will suffer in the search for the guilty.
As the night drags on, a suspect emerges, a servant girl, young and clearly terrified, who was seen near the pie during the critical moment. She's brought before the Lord, trembling so violently you can see it from across the hall. She denies everything through tears. She was only adjusting the pie's position, making sure it was centered on the platter. She didn't tamper with it. She wouldn't dare. The Lord doesn't believe her, or
Perhaps he does, but needs someone to blame, and she's convenient. She's taken away by guards, her fate sealed by proximity to disaster. You feel sick watching it happen, knowing that guilt or innocence matters less than the Lord's need to restore order and demonstrate control. The feast limps to its conclusion. More wine is poured, loosening tongues that speculate wildly about the pie incident. Was it political sabotage? Personal revenge? A servant's prank gone catastrophically wrong? Theories multiply, each more elaborate than the last, because the truth, that someone succeeded in making the Lord look foolish, is too simple and too dangerous to state plainly. Eventually, people begin to leave, trickling out in ones and twos until the hall empties like a bathtub with the plug pulled. You join the exodus, climbing stairs that seem steeper after hours of sitting and drinking. Your room waits, cold and dark, the bed's straw mattress rustling a welcome that's more resignation than comfort. You lie awake, processing everything you've witnessed, the feast, the sabotage, the swift, brutal response. The medieval palace operates on principles you're only beginning to understand. Power demonstrated through excess, order maintained through fear, and justice administered swiftly to whoever is closest when blame needs assigning. Outside your window the night is quiet, except for the usual sounds: guards calling to each other, dogs barking. Somewhere distant the sound of someone crying or singing, you can't tell which. The palace never truly sleeps, it only pretends, holding its breath until dawn when the whole performance begins again. You think about the servant girl, probably in the dungeon now, facing questions delivered with iron urgency. You think about the cook, whose career might be over despite her innocence. You think about the Lord, in his great bed with its heavy curtains, wondering who hates him enough to ruin his feast and whether they'll try something worse next time. The medieval palace, you realize, is a machine that runs on fear, ambition, and the constant threat of violence, barely restrained by etiquette. The feast was a performance, but so was everything else. The morning prayers, the physician's rounds, the dungeon's tortures, the daily rituals of hierarchy and submission. As you finally drift toward sleep, you understand why you wouldn't survive more than one night here. Not because of the food or the cold or the scratchy blankets, but because living in a medieval palace requires a kind of constant vigilance that would exhaust anyone. Every meal might be poisoned, every friend might be a spy, every conversation is potentially treasonous. Every moment demands that you watch yourself, watch others, calculate angles, measure threats. The palace is beautiful from a distance, impressive in its scope and grandeur. But up close, you see the mechanisms of power that make it run. The dungeons that enforce obedience, the feasts that buy loyalty, the physicians who keep everyone alive long enough to be useful, the servants who do the actual work while nobles play at importance. You survived your visit. The servant girl might not survive hers. That's the difference between guest and resident in a medieval palace. Guests get to leave. Residents live with the consequences of every choice, every mistake, every accident of proximity to power. The candle gutters out. Darkness settles like a blanket. You close your eyes and let the day's images parade past. Mathilde in her smoky kitchen, Bernard with his leeches, the keeper with his calm explanations, the Lord at his high table watching a pie explode into scandal. Tomorrow you'll leave this place, return to wherever you came from, and carry these memories like strange souvenirs from a trip you can't quite believe you took. But for now, you sleep the uneasy sleep of someone who's seen too much and understood just enough to be grateful they live in different times. Times with antibiotics, working plumbing, and desserts that don't double as political statements. Times when justice involves courts rather than torture chambers, when medicine involves science rather than astrology, when dinner is just dinner and not a potential assassination attempt. The medieval palace was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, a place where human ingenuity created beauty, comfort, and art, while simultaneously creating dungeons, torture devices, and social systems that crushed most people under their weight. You wouldn't survive more than one night there, but you survived this night. This tour through history's darker corridors, this exploration of how our ancestors lived when life was nasty, brutish, and in need of significantly better plumbing.
Morning arrives with rooster crow and church bells, the medieval alarm system that respects neither status nor preference for sleeping in. You wake stiff from the straw mattress, your body a map of complaints about sleeping arrangements designed by people who thought comfort was a moral failing. The palace is already alive. Servants hustle through corridors carrying water, food, laundry, messages. The machine that briefly paused overnight has restarted with renewed energy. You can hear Matilda's voice from 3 floors away, shouting orders in the kitchen. You can smell bread baking, smoke from 100 fires, and the underlying palace aroma that no amount of herbs can quite disguise. A servant brings you water for washing. Cold, of course, because hot water is for people far more important than you. You splash your face, dress quickly, and prepare to take your leave. Your audience with the Lord is brief, conducted in a public room where he receives a dozen people before breakfast. He thanks you for your visit with the sincerity of someone reciting lines learned long ago. You bow, murmur appropriate responses, and back out as protocol demands. The courtyard is busy with morning traffic. Merchants arriving with goods, messengers departing with letters, a group of pilgrims passing through on their way to somewhere holier. You collect your horse from the stables, where it's been eating better than most humans, and prepare to ride out. As you pass through the outer gate, you look back one last time at the palace. From here, it looks like something from a fairy tale. Stone towers reaching toward clouds, banners snapping in the breeze, walls that have stood for centuries and promise to stand for centuries more. It's majestic, impressive, the kind of place that makes you understand why people write ballads about castles and kings. But you know what's inside those walls now. The kitchens where servants burn themselves daily to produce feasts that will be consumed in hours and forgotten in days. The bedchambers where lords sleep fitfully, worried about plots and poisons. The physicians' rooms where medicine is equal parts knowledge and guesswork, where leeches are considered cutting-edge treatment. The dungeons where justice wears iron and speaks in screams. The medieval palace is a monument to human ambition and human cruelty, often in the same room. It's where the best and worst of humanity gathered, where art and torture existed in adjacent chambers, where the distance between feast and famine was measured in floors rather than miles. You ride away as the sun climbs higher, warming your back, drying the dew on the grass. With each mile, the palace shrinks behind you until it's just a silhouette against the sky, then a memory, then a story you'll tell with appropriate dramatic pauses about the night you spent among medieval nobility and survived to complain about it. The experience taught you things history books only hint at. That medieval life wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a daily negotiation with death disguised as dinner. That power wasn't just abstract, it was the Lord's hand on your fate, the dungeon keeper's tools, the physician's leeches. That survival required constant vigilance, careful words, and enough luck to avoid being blamed for pies that exploded at inopportune moments. You're grateful for modernity now in ways you never were before, grateful for medicine that doesn't involve deliberate blood loss, grateful for justice systems that at least pretend to care about evidence, grateful for buildings with proper insulation and food that comes with expiration dates, grateful for beds without straw that conceals an ecosystem, for privacy that doesn't require heavy curtains, for mornings that don't begin with church bells designed to wake the dead. The medieval palace is behind you now, both literally and temporally. You're returning to your time, your place, your life, where the most dangerous thing about dinner is usually overeating rather than poisoning, where doctors understand germ theory, where dungeons are historical curiosities rather than active institutions. As you ride into the distance, the palace's silhouette fades into the landscape, but its lessons remain. History isn't just dates and battles and kings, it's also kitchens and bedrooms and dungeons. It's servants who work themselves to exhaustion, physicians who tried their best with terrible tools, prisoners who suffered for crimes they may or may not have committed. It's the reminder that progress isn't inevitable, that the comforts we take for granted were earned through centuries of trial, error, and suffering, that our ancestors weren't stupider than us, they just knew less, had fewer tools, and did the best they could with what they had. The sun is fully up now, burning away the morning mist. The road ahead is clear, stretching toward home and modernity and all the boring conveniences that make life worth living. You've survived your night in the medieval palace. You've seen how the other half lived, or tried to live, or died trying. And you're profoundly grateful that you don't have to do it again. So, as you drift off tonight in your modern bed with its proper mattress and clean sheets, in your home with its working plumbing and reliable medicine, spare a thought for everyone who lived through medieval times, who survived the feasts and the famines, the plagues and the politics, the cold stone floors and the scratchy wool blankets. They did their best in an age that was trying its best to kill them. They built palaces and cathedrals and systems of government that, for all their flaws, laid foundations for the world we know today. They were as smart as us, as funny, as scared, as hopeful. They just had the misfortune to live in an era when a simple infection could kill you and the cure might kill you faster. Sleep well. Dream of soft beds and hot water and antibiotics, and be grateful that the most medieval thing in your life is probably the music at your local Renaissance fair, which is exactly how much medieval you should have to deal with on any given Tuesday. Good night.